Captain Tom Miller stared through the main viewport of the ESS Curiosity, and for the first time in his 15 years of space service, he had to bite his lip to stop himself from laughing. The massive Imperial ships floating before him looked like something straight out of a child's dream of space wedding cakes. "Are you seeing this?" he asked his first officer, Jack Woods, who was making strange, choking sounds while trying to maintain his composure. "Yes, sir," Woods managed to reply, his face turning red from held-back laughter. "They're very shiny." The Imperial ships were perfect geometric shapes, spheres, cubes, and pyramids, all connected by delicate golden bridges that served no apparent purpose. Their surfaces gleamed with such polish that the stars reflected off them like mirrors, and decorative golden spirals covered every available space. "Attention, primitive vessel," a voice boomed through their communication system, somehow managing to sound both bored and impossibly proper at the same time. "You have entered the territory of the most magnificent and eternally resplendent Galactic Empire of the 7 spiral arms and 13 nebulae." Miller glanced at his communications officer, Lisa Brown, who had stuffed her uniform sleeve into her mouth to keep from giggling. "Do they want us to repeat all that?" she whispered. The voice continued. "You will now commence the proper protocol of first contact, Section 7, Subsection 12, Paragraph 3, Line 2, which begins with the ceremonial dance of submission, followed by the chant of Imperial glory." The bridge crew of the Curiosity fell silent for a moment before breaking into poorly suppressed snickers. These aliens couldn't be serious. "This is Captain Thomas Miller of the Earth spaceship Curiosity," Miller replied, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. "We come in peace and friendship from Earth. We'd be happy to establish diplomatic relations, but I'm afraid we don't know your ceremonial dances." There was a long pause. "What do you mean you don't know the ceremonies?" The voice sounded genuinely confused. "All civilized species learn the ceremonies before attempting space travel. It's the only proper way." Miller exchanged glances with his crew. The science officer, Dave Parker, was frantically taking notes while trying not to laugh at the golden spirals that were now lighting up in sequence on the Imperial ships. "We sort of just built rockets and went to space," Miller explained. "We didn't know we needed ceremonies." Another long pause followed. "Built rockets and just went to space." The Imperial voice sounded faint, as if its owner might be close to fainting. "Without the proper protocols, without the 300 years of preparation, without the sacred geometry calculations." "Well, we did do some math," Parker chimed in helpfully. "You know, trajectory calculations, fuel equations, that sort of thing." "Fuel?" The voice actually squeaked. "You mean you still use combustion?" The horror in the alien's voice set off another round of muffled laughter among the crew. Miller tried to salvage the situation. "Look, maybe we could meet in person and discuss our different approaches. We're very interested in learning about your civilization." The Imperial ships suddenly began arranging themselves into what appeared to be some sort of formation. The crew watched in amazement as the vessels spent nearly 10 minutes adjusting their positions by tiny increments until they formed a perfect geometric pattern. "You will follow us to the Imperial capital station," the voice declared. "Please maintain a distance of exactly 7,432.6 units behind our formation. No more, no less. It is the only proper way." As the Curiosity fell into position behind the Imperial fleet, Miller looked around at his crew, all of whom were still fighting back grins. "Send a message back to Earth," he ordered Brown. "Tell them we've made first contact with an advanced alien civilization." He paused, then added with a smile, "And tell them to send diplomats with a good sense of humor. We're going to need it." The human ship followed its escort through space, its irregular and practical design standing out like a thumb among the geometric perfection of the Imperial fleet. Inside, the crew members shared knowing looks. Humanity's entry into galactic society was going to be interesting, to say the least. The Imperial capital station looked like a giant crystal snowflake made of gold and silver. Captain Miller and his crew stood at the docking port of the ESS Curiosity, watching as a group of Imperial officials walked towards them in perfect formation, taking exactly one step every 2 seconds. "How long is this going to take?" Jack Woods whispered. The Imperial group had started their approach from 100 meters away. "At this rate, about 5 minutes," Dave Parker calculated, checking his watch. "I think this is their idea of a proper walking speed." Finally, the Imperial delegation reached them. Their leader, a tall figure in an impossibly clean white uniform, covered in golden swirls, looked down at the humans with an expression of barely hidden horror. "I am Grand Admiral Lord Perfect Order through Eternal Harmony," he announced. "You may refer to me as Lord Perfect, as I understand your primitive language has limitations." Miller bit his tongue before he could suggest Lord Fancy as an alternative. "Welcome aboard, Lord Perfect," he managed. "Would you like a tour of our ship?" The Grand Admiral's face turned slightly pale. "You mean, enter that irregular shape?" He gestured at the Curiosity. "But it's not even a proper geometric form. How do you navigate with such chaos?" "We just use corridors and signs," Lisa Brown explained helpfully. "And sometimes we put arrows on the floor." Several Imperial officials looked like they might faint. Lord Perfect pulled out a golden tablet. "Let us proceed with the inspection. First, please explain your propulsion system." Dave Parker stepped forward. "Well, basically, we use controlled explosions to..." Explosions. The entire Imperial delegation took 3 perfectly synchronized steps backward. "You travel through space using explosions." "Well, yes," Parker continued. "It's quite efficient, actually. We mix fuel and oxidizer." "Stop, please stop." Lord Perfect held up his hand. "You mean to tell us you reached the stars by setting things on fire?" Miller nodded. "Pretty much. How do your ships work?" The Grand Admiral drew himself up proudly. "Our ships are powered by the harmony crystals, which convert the mathematical perfection of the universe into energy through a series of exactly 1 million calculations performed each nanosecond." The human stared blankly. "And how much power does that generate?" Parker asked. "Enough to move our ships at 1/8 the speed of your primitive explosion-powered vessels," another official admitted quietly, then looked mortified at speaking out of turn. The inspection continued, with each revelation about human technology causing new waves of horror among the Imperials. They were shocked by the manual controls. "You mean you actually touch the machinery?" Appalled by the crew quarters. "People sleep in different-sized rooms." And nearly had a group breakdown when they saw the mess hall. "You eat together at the same time." The final straw came when they reached the engine room. "What are those round things?" Lord Perfect asked, pointing at some machinery. "Those are wheels," the ship's engineer explained. "They help move heavy equipment around." The entire Imperial delegation froze. "Wheels?" Lord Perfect whispered in horror. "But wheels are circles. Perfect circles. You dare to use the sacred shape for manual labor." Miller exchanged glances with his crew. "How do you move things in your ships?" "We use gravitational field manipulators, of course," the Grand Admiral replied. "They only take 3 hours to warm up and require a team of 20 mathematicians to calculate each movement." As the inspection concluded, Lord Perfect gathered himself to his full height. "Despite your crude methods and shocking disregard for proper geometry, the Empire has decided to educate you in proper civilization." "That's very kind," Miller replied diplomatically. "A cultural education officer will be assigned to your ship," the Grand Admiral continued. "We will teach you the proper way to exist in space." As the Imperial delegation began their precisely timed departure, Miller turned to his crew. "Well, that went well." "Sir," Parker said, checking his tablet, "I've been doing some calculations. Their entire empire runs on making things as complicated as possible." "And?" Miller asked. Parker grinned. They have no idea what's about to hit them when they learn about human efficiency. The crew watched as the Imperial delegation continued their slow march back, their golden uniforms glinting under the station's lights. Humanity's introduction to galactic society was going to be interesting and possibly revolutionary, even if they didn't mean it to be. Cultural Officer Robert Smith was not what the crew of the ESS Curiosity expected. Unlike other Imperials, he wore his golden uniform slightly wrinkled, a scandal by Imperial standards, and sometimes walked at different speeds, which had already earned him weird looks from other Imperial officials. Today, Smith announced to the gathered crew, "I will study your cultural practices, and you will learn proper Imperial behavior." He pulled out a golden tablet. First question. Why do you make those strange spasming movements with your faces? You mean smiling? Lisa Brown asked. Or laughing? Ah yes, those terms are in our database. But what is their purpose? Well, Captain Miller explained, we laugh when something is funny. Smith looked confused. Define funny. The crew members looked at each other. How do you explain humor to someone who had never experienced it? Okay, let me tell you a joke, Jack Woods offered. Why did the chicken cross the road? What is a chicken? Smith asked, taking careful notes. It's like a small bird we eat. Anyway, why did it cross the road? Based on Imperial logic protocols, a bird would only cross a designated transport path if it had filed the proper documentation and received approval from at least 3 governmental departments. Smith answered seriously. No, Woods laughed. The answer is to get to the other side. Smith stared blankly. Of course it was to reach the opposite side. Why is this information causing you all to make those spasming movements again? That's the joke. It's funny because it's obvious. Brown tried to explain. You find obvious things amusing. Smith looked genuinely puzzled. The Empire finds obvious things to be obvious. The cultural exchange continued with more confusion. Smith was horrified to learn that humans sometimes sat in chairs without measuring the exact angle of their posture. He was shocked that they ate different foods on different days based on what they felt like eating, rather than following the Empire's nutritional optimization charts. But the biggest surprise came when Dave Parker's cat wandered into the room. Alert. Smith jumped onto a chair. There is an unauthorized life form aboard. I must contact Imperial security. That's just Whiskers, Parker explained, picking up the cat. She's my pet. Smith slowly got down from the chair. Pet. You keep a smaller animal in your living space, voluntarily. Sure. Want to pet her? Smith cautiously extended a hand toward Whiskers, who promptly began purring. The Imperial's eyes went wide. It's vibrating. Is it preparing to explode? No, that means she's happy. Parker laughed. Cats purr when they're content. Happy. Content, Smith muttered, writing frantically on his tablet. And you allow these emotions to influence your actions. Of course, Miller said. Don't Imperials feel emotions? We are taught from birth to suppress all irregular thoughts and feelings, Smith explained. They interfere with proper geometric appreciation. As Smith continued petting Whiskers, the crew noticed something extraordinary. The corners of his mouth were twitching upward. Officer Smith, Brown said carefully, I think you're smiling. Smith touched his face in horror. Impossible. I would never. But he couldn't seem to stop. This is most irregular. I must report this to my superiors immediately. As he hurried out of the room, still fighting the smile, Miller turned to his crew. I think we just introduced the concept of joy to the Empire. Sir, Woods grinned. Should we tell them about music next? One cultural shock at a time, Miller replied. Though I would love to see their faces when they learn about dancing. Later that day, Smith returned with a strange request. Could you? He looked around nervously. Tell me another chicken joke. The crew spent the next hour teaching Smith about knock-knock jokes, puns, and silly faces. With each lesson, his perfect Imperial posture relaxed a little more. "I must inform you," Smith said finally, trying to keep a straight face, "that this is absolutely against all Imperial protocols." He paused. "Please continue." As the humans shared more jokes and stories, they didn't realize they were starting a quiet revolution in the Empire, one laugh at a time. The Imperial War Games started exactly at 800 hours, not a second earlier or later. Captain Miller watched from the bridge of the ESS Curiosity as 50 Imperial ships arranged themselves in a perfect geometric pattern that must have taken hours to plan. "Attention, primitive vessel." The familiar voice of Lord Perfect boomed through the communications system. "We will now assess your military capabilities through a series of carefully choreographed exercises." "Choreographed?" Woods whispered to Miller. "Are we having a battle or a ballet?" The first exercise was simple. The Curiosity had to defend itself against 3 Imperial ships. The Imperial vessels, gleaming with their golden decorations, moved in perfect synchronization, following what was obviously a pre-planned pattern. "Captain," Dave Parker called from his station, "they're sending us a schedule of their attack moves for the next 6 hours." Miller stared at the document in disbelief. "They're telling us exactly what they're going to do." "It's the proper way," the Imperial commander explained over the comm. "All civilized combat must be precisely planned and properly documented." Miller grinned. "Helm, take us behind that asteroid." "What?" "No." The Imperial commander sounded scandalized. "That's not in the schedule. You can't just hide." But the Curiosity was already moving, using the asteroid's mass to shield itself from the Imperial ship's sensors. "This is most improper," the Imperial commander protested. "Combat must take place in open space where all participants can appreciate the geometric perfection of the maneuvers." The Curiosity darted out from behind the asteroid, fired its maneuvering thrusters in an irregular pattern, and tagged all 3 Imperial ships with its training lasers before they could respond. "Exercise complete," Miller announced cheerfully. "We win." There was a long silence from the Imperial fleet. "This cannot be correct," Lord Perfect's voice returned. "You used chaos, randomness. How can you fight without a proper plan?" "We had a plan," Miller replied. "It was just a flexible one." The next exercise involved fleet coordination. 20 Imperial ships performed an intricate dance of position changes that looked beautiful but left them completely exposed. The Curiosity and its 2 sister ships, which had arrived for the war games, simply formed a triangle and attacked from 3 directions at once. "Stop! Stop!" Lord Perfect commanded. "You're not following any of the recognized fleet formations. Where are your golden spirals? Your symmetric attack patterns?" "We're following the formation called Whatever Works," Miller responded. By the end of the day, the Imperial fleet was in disarray. Not physically, as they maintained perfect geometric spacing at all times, but mentally. Their commanders couldn't understand how they'd been defeated by ships that didn't even have proper ceremonial plating. Lord Perfect called an emergency meeting aboard the Imperial flagship. "This is impossible," he declared to the assembled human and Imperial officers. "Your crude vessels, your irregular tactics, your complete disregard for proper battle aesthetics. How are you winning?" Miller stepped forward. "Sir, in human military history, we learned something important. The simplest solution is often the best. We call it the KISS principle." "KISS." Several Imperial officers looked alarmed. "Is this some sort of combat ritual?" "It stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid," Miller explained. The room fell silent. Using the word stupid in the presence of Imperial officers was apparently another violation of protocol. "Simple?" Lord Perfect finally spoke, his voice weak. "You want us to make things simple." "Let me demonstrate," Miller said. He picked up a piece of paper from a nearby desk. "Your ships are beautiful, but all these golden decorations, they make great targeting points. And these perfect geometric formations, They make your movements predictable. He crumpled the paper into a ball and tossed it at the recycling bin. It went in perfectly. Sometimes, Miller concluded, messy works better than perfect. The Imperial officers watched in horror as the crumpled paper sat in the bin, its perfect geometric shape destroyed, yet somehow still functional. Lord Perfect swayed slightly. I must report this to the Imperial Council. This changes everything we thought we knew about warfare. As the humans left the meeting, Woods turned to his captain. Sir, did we just revolutionize Imperial military doctrine by being lazy? Miller smiled. Sometimes the best way to win is to not try so hard to be perfect. Behind them, they could hear Lord Perfect still muttering. Simple. They want to make things simple. A month after the War Games, strange things started happening in the Imperial capital station. It began small. An Imperial junior officer was caught walking at irregular speeds down a corridor. Then someone found a group of young engineers laughing at a knock-knock joke in a maintenance bay. But the real crisis started with Casual Friday. Robert Smith, now promoted to Chief Cultural Exchange Officer, stood before the Imperial Council trying to explain why 20 young Imperial officers had shown up to work wearing their uniforms without proper starching. You see, my lords, Smith explained nervously, humans have this tradition called Casual Friday where they... Silence. Lord Perfect thundered. This is unacceptable. Next you'll tell me they were sitting in chairs without measuring angles. Smith coughed. Actually, my lord, some of them were leaning. Several council members fainted. Meanwhile, aboard the ESS Curiosity, Captain Miller was meeting with his crew about these developments. Sir, Lisa Brown reported, trying not to laugh. Apparently someone taught the Imperial maintenance crew about coffee breaks. They're now stopping work at random times to drink beverages and tell jokes. How terrible, Miller said with a straight face. Any other catastrophes? Well, Dave Parker added, checking his tablet. Someone introduced the concept of office parties to the Imperial Engineering Department. They tried to calculate the exact mathematical formula for fun and ended up having an actual good time by accident. The situation grew more serious when a group of young Imperial officers submitted a formal proposal to redesign Imperial ships. Their suggestion: maybe everything doesn't need to be covered in gold. The Imperial Council called an emergency session. The humans were invited to attend, though invited meant they were given a 400-page document detailing proper audience protocol. This is chaos, declared Lord Perfect, standing at the center of the perfectly circular council chamber. These humans have infected our youth with dangerous ideas about efficiency and comfort, added another council member in horror. And worst of all, humor, concluded a third, shuddering. Miller stood up to speak, breaking at least 15 protocols about proper speaking turns. My lords, if I may, your young officers aren't rebelling. They're adapting. They've discovered that some human practices actually work better. Better than perfect geometric harmony. Lord Perfect looked skeptical. Let me demonstrate, Miller said. He turned to Smith. Robert, tell them about the paperwork experiment. Smith stepped forward, his uniform slightly wrinkled. Scandalous. Yes, my lords, we tried processing maintenance requests the human way, with simple forms and direct approvals. Instead of taking the standard 3 weeks, we finished in 2 hours. A murmur ran through the council chamber. Efficiency was hard to argue with, even for the Empire. And Smith continued, gaining confidence, the engineering team that learned to take coffee breaks. Their productivity is up 50%. Turns out, letting people rest actually helps them work better. But, Lord Perfect sputtered. What about tradition? What about proper protocol? An unexpected voice spoke up, a young Imperial officer in the audience. My lord, what if we kept the important traditions but made some things simpler? We could still have our geometric harmony where it matters, but maybe we don't need a 17-step approval process to replace a light bulb. The council chamber erupted in chaos, or as close to chaos as the Empire could get, which meant everyone spoke in turn, but with slightly raised voices. As the debate raged on, Miller turned to his crew. "I think we just started a revolution without meaning to." "Sir," Woods replied with a grin, "should we tell them about casual video game nights?" "One cultural shock at a time," Miller laughed. "Let them process casual Fridays first." In the end, the Imperial Council reached a compromise, which they documented in a mere 50 pages instead of the usual 1,000. Young officers could implement some human practices as long as they maintained minimal geometric standards. As they left the council chamber, Smith caught up with the humans. "Captain Miller, I have a confession. I started telling jokes to my pet cat." "You got a pet cat?" Miller asked, surprised. Smith smiled, an act that no longer scandalized his colleagues. "Yes, I named him Chaos. It seemed appropriate. The rebellion had begun, and it was spreading one smile at a time." The emergency alarms in the Imperial capital station weren't geometric shapes or golden spirals. They were just plain, loud, and very urgent. Captain Miller and his crew rushed to the Imperial Command Center, where they found Lord Perfect staring at a large display screen. For the first time, his uniform was actually wrinkled. "They're coming," he said simply. "The swarm is coming." The screen showed thousands of black, insect-like ships moving toward Imperial space. They didn't follow any geometric patterns. They didn't have any golden decorations. They just moved forward, consuming everything in their path. "What are they?" Miller asked. "The swarm," Smith explained, his usual smile gone. "A species that lives only to consume and grow. They attacked the Empire once, 1,000 years ago. We survived only because they changed direction randomly." "Have you made battle plans?" Woods asked. Lord Perfect gestured to a stack of golden tablets. "We have calculated 10,000 possible geometric defense formations. Each one is perfectly balanced and aesthetically pleasing." Miller picked up a tablet and read it. Then he did something that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. He laughed. "Sir," Smith gasped, "this is hardly the time for—" "No," Miller interrupted. "This is exactly the time. Look at these plans. Every single one assumes the enemy will follow proper battle protocols. But the swarm doesn't care about geometry. They don't follow rules. You can't fight chaos with perfect formations." The Imperial officers looked lost. "But how else can we fight?" one asked. "We wing it," Miller said. "Wing what?" Lord Perfect looked confused. "It means we make it up as we go along," Woods explained. "We adapt. We improvise." Several Imperial officers fainted at the word improvise. "Impossible," Lord Perfect declared. "All military actions must be properly planned and documented in triplicate." "The swarm will be here in 6 hours," Miller pointed out. "How long does it take to process those documents?" 5 to 7 business days, an officer replied automatically. Miller turned to Lord Perfect. "Sir, you have a choice. You can follow proper protocols and look perfectly geometric as you lose, or you can try something new and maybe survive." A long silence followed. Lord Perfect looked at the approaching swarm, then at his perfectly organized battle plans, then at his wrinkled uniform. Finally, he took a deep breath. "What do you suggest, Captain Miller?" Miller grinned. "First, we mess up their perfect geometric sensors. Dave, remember that trick with the asteroids from the war games?" Parker nodded. "If we scatter asteroid fragments randomly, their sensors will get confused trying to find patterns that aren't there. Next," Miller continued, "we use their love of order against them. They'll expect attacks to follow logical patterns, so we do the opposite. Random attacks, irregular movements, complete chaos. That's... Lord Perfect struggled for words. "Brilliant?" Smith suggested. "Horrifying," Lord Perfect corrected. "But possibly effective." The next few hours were the most chaotic in Imperial history. Ships moved without filing flight plans. Officers gave orders without proper documentation. Someone even suggested they remove some golden decorations to improve engine efficiency. As the swarm approached, Miller watched the Imperial fleet trying to practice random movements. It was like watching someone try to dance badly on purpose. "They're still too organized," he muttered to Woods. "They can't help themselves." Then Smith spoke up. "I have an idea. Play that thing you showed me. What was it called? Rock music?" Miller's eyes lit up. He connected his tablet to the Imperial fleet's communication system and hit play. The sound of classic rock filled every Imperial ship. "This is completely irregular," one Imperial captain complained. "The beat doesn't follow any mathematical progression." "Exactly," Smith said. "Don't think. Just feel the rhythm and move." To everyone's amazement, it worked. The Imperial ships, trying to make sense of the music's irregular patterns, began moving unpredictably. Their perfect formations dissolved into beautiful chaos. As the swarm arrived, they faced something they'd never encountered before, an Imperial fleet that didn't make sense. Miller watched from the command center and smiled. "Sometimes," he said to Lord Perfect, "the best plan is no plan at all." Lord Perfect, his uniform now hopelessly wrinkled, just nodded. "I think I'm getting a headache," he said, "but I'm also feeling something else. Excitement." "Welcome to the human way," Miller replied. "Now let's show the swarm why chaos can be a good thing." 1 month after the swarm's defeat, the Imperial capital station looked very different. The golden decorations were still there, but now they shared space with more practical features. And in the main hall, something unprecedented had appeared. A coffee shop. Captain Miller sat with Lord Perfect, both enjoying beverages from Imperfect Cafe, the Empire's first coffee shop that didn't measure liquid amounts to exactly 6 decimal places. "I still can't believe we won using rock music and random movements," Lord Perfect said, sipping his coffee irregularly, something that would have been a capital offense 3 months ago. "The swarm's biggest weakness was trying to find patterns in our actions," Miller replied. "Hard to find patterns when there aren't any." Around them, the station buzzed with activity. Imperial officers walked at varying speeds, some even hurrying. Another recent innovation. Young engineers gathered in corners, sharing jokes and ideas without filing proper conversation permits. "The Imperial Council meets today to discuss the changes," Lord Perfect said. "They've asked you to speak." Miller nodded. This time, he hadn't received a 400-page protocol document for the meeting. Instead, Smith had sent him a simple message: "Just show up and be yourself." The council chamber had changed too. The perfectly geometric seating had been replaced with comfortable chairs. Some council members were even leaning back slightly. "Captain Miller," the head counselor began, "your influence has caused unprecedented changes in our society. Some would say too many changes." Miller noticed the head counselor was wearing a casual robe, formal, but without the usual geometric patterns. "But," the counselor continued, "we cannot argue with results. Our productivity is up 200%. Our ships move better without excess golden decorations. And," he paused dramatically, "people seem happier." A young Imperial officer stood up, without waiting for the proper speaking time. "The human ways aren't perfect, but they work. I propose we create a new principle: perfect is the enemy of good enough." Instead of fainting, the council members actually nodded in agreement. Therefore, the head counselor announced, "We have made a decision. The Empire will adopt a new philosophy: organized chaos." Smith, sitting beside Miller, actually laughed out loud. No one called for his arrest. The changes were implemented with surprising speed, mostly because they removed the requirement for 17 different departments to approve every decision. Imperial ships were redesigned, keeping their beautiful shapes but adding practical features. The military adopted what they called structured randomness for their tactics. They even started a comedy club. Miller attended the first meeting of the Imperial Humor Association. The jokes were terrible, mostly involving geometric shapes and proper documentation, but people laughed anyway. It was a start. "Captain," Smith said during the celebration that followed, another human tradition the Empire had embraced. "I have something to show you." He led Miller to the station's main viewport. Outside, the Imperial fleet was performing maneuvers, but instead of rigid geometric patterns, the ships moved in a beautiful dance, combining order and randomness in a way that was uniquely Imperial. "We're calling it controlled imperfection," Smith explained proudly. "Beautiful, but practical. Perfect, but flexible." Lord Perfect joined them, wearing his now permanently wrinkled uniform like a badge of honor. "We're even starting an exchange program. Young Imperial officers will spend time on human ships to learn your ways, and human officers can come study with us. Just don't teach them too much about proper documentation," Miller joked. "Oh, we've simplified that too," Lord Perfect replied. "Forms now only need 3 signatures instead of 30. As Miller prepared to leave the station, he took one last look around. The Empire had changed, but it hadn't lost its identity. The golden spirals and geometric shapes remained, but now they shared space with practical designs and comfortable spaces. Order and chaos had found a balance. "You know what the best part is?" Smith said as they watched a group of young officers playing with a cat in the corridor. "What's that?" "We finally understand why humans couldn't stop laughing when they first met us. And now we can laugh too." Miller smiled. The Empire had learned to laugh at itself, and in doing so, had become stronger than ever. Sometimes the best revolution wasn't about destroying the old ways, but about learning to bend a little. As the ESS Curiosity departed, Miller heard one last message from the station. "Farewell, human friends. May your chaos be organized and your imperfections perfect." And for once, everyone laughed together.